African power and can be a major powerhouse in world affairs. But to do that, we need to change our direction.
It can be done. This country cannot be written off. It can be done. And this country will still lead Africa. We're making steps, slow steps, and moving on. I mean, it took the Americans 200 plus years to get where they are. We're moving.
What do you know about the international regulatory instruments of the IMO being implemented by NIMASA in Nigeria? A lot? Zilch? Well, it doesn't really matter. On the program today, we'll be throwing more light on these international regulatory instruments. So I'd like to please sit back and get to know a lot about them. Aside that, on the show today, we'll be sharing with you the visit of the Flight Officer Commanding NAVTRAC of the Nigerian Navy. Security in the Gulf of Guinea is always very, very paramount. We'll talk about that on the program today also. My name is Cordelia Otley. This is NIMASA This Week, your guide to the maritime sector in Nigeria.
Do you know who a seafarer is? Seafarers are the people who make the world go round. Seafarers are people who have been employed to work on ships. They ensure smooth sailing of the ship while making sure that goods and services get to us from every part of the world. And despite the COVID-19 pandemic, this set of people are still working for the benefit of everyone. Wow! Let us celebrate these special people, as they are the people who truly make the world go round. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency, NIMASA.
Let's start off from the point where we're talking capacity building. The management of NIMASA has again restated its commitment to capacity building. This much came to light when the Flag Officer Commanding Naval Training Command paid a courtesy visit, a working visit. He led his team, and some of the things they talked about had to do with certification of some courses.
The meeting, which took place in compliance with protocols of the NCDC due to COVID-19, had NIMASA Director General Dr. Bashir Jamo and his management team in attendance, while the Flag Officer Commanding Naval Training Command, Rear Admiral Frederick Ogu, led the naval team to the meeting. The FOC NAVTRAC called for improved collaboration between NIMASA and the Nigerian Navy, with particular reference to certification and infrastructural utilization. The FOC also disclosed that the Navy had training facilities that were available to both civilian and military personnel. He urged Nigerians willing to take up a career in the maritime sector to take advantage of the naval facilities across the country.
NIMASA is very important to my command because NIMASA is responsible for certification of some courses some maritime courses like Global Maritime Distress and Safety System, GMDSS courses, search and rescue courses. You provide certification. So we want a situation where we can collaborate so that the naval personnel who train in these courses can get the global certification that you provide. Also, we have training for electronic chart display information system, that's the ECDIS, which you, the NIMASA, also provide certification for. Ship handling in shallow waters, and standards of training, certification, and watchkeeping for seafarers, STCW. The NIMASA also provides certification for this, boat work, power handling, helicopter controller training, and several other courses that the NIMASA is the body responsible for providing certification. So we would like to collaborate with you in this area so that our personnel can get the certification that will help them after they leave the service or while they're in the service. On the other hand, in case you need to train anybody in these areas, we are available. We have the facilities, we have the equipment to provide training.
He also called for harmonization of curricula between both agencies of government. In his response, the NIMASA Director General, Dr. Bashir Jamo, assured the naval team of improved collaboration. He also said NIMASA would also look into the direction of naval facilities and how to harmonize the training guidelines to meet the standards required by the International Maritime Organization IMO for certification.
I can observe that you read out what the type of courses you offer, but I think your curriculum may have much more than you mentioned, and then we will be willing also to exchange our own curriculum for you to see the areas that you may likely join us. I quite appreciate and I'm very passionate of seeing the interchange between the civilians and the armed forces in terms of training, because you are cross-breeding ideas. The training is not only formal training in the classroom. The interactions, also go a long way for us to understand each other.
The DG spoke on the Deep Blue project, also known as the Integrated National Security and Waterways Protection Infrastructure, which aims to comprehensively tackle insecurity on Nigeria's territorial waters, an exclusive economic zone up to the Gulf of Guinea.
The Deep Blue project is one of the most important projects that the maritime industry ever experienced in so many decades. Most of the assets that we have for the Deep Blue project arrive in Nigeria. What we are left behind now is the local component. And what is the local component? The human element that can, man those assets. So they are yet to receive the training. That underscores the importance of training. The technical aspect of the training to acquire skill, to perform well, to meet the target must be acquired.
Introducing the new face of the Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency, NIMASA. We are charting the direction for a maritime and regulating the industry for a better, bigger, and more economically stable Nigeria. Evolved to serve you better. We are NIMASA. New face, rejuvenated service. NIMASA, changing the tides in your favor.
As I said at the beginning of the program, we will be sharing some of the international conventions of the IMO with you. NIMASA, being the Maritime Administration here in Nigeria, is in charge of implementing those international conventions. So I invite you right now to please sit back and watch as we bring to you some of the key conventions of the International Maritime Organization.
The International Maritime Organization, IMO, is a specialized agency of the United Nations that is responsible for measures to improve the safety and security of international shipping and to prevent marine pollution from ships. The IMO sets standards for safety and security of international shipping. NIMASA is the maritime administration in Nigeria. thus responsible for implementation of these protocols and conventions in Nigeria. While some have been domesticated, others have been ratified by the Nigerian government. Some of these regulatory instruments include the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, SOLAS 1974 as amended, the International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships 1973 as modified by the Protocol of 1978 relating thereto and by the Protocol of 1997, MARPOL. The third main convention is the International Convention on Standards of Training, Certification and Watchkeeping for Seafarers, STCW, as amended, including the 1995 and 2010 Manila Amendments. Other conventions relating to maritime safety and security and ship-port interface include the Convention on the International Regulations for Preventing Collisions at Sea, COLREG, 1972. Convention on Facilitation of International Maritime Traffic, FAL, 1965. International Convention on Load Lines, LL, 1966. International Convention on Maritime Search and Rescue, SAR, 1979. And the Convention for the Suppression of Unlawful Acts Against the Safety of Maritime Navigation, SUA, 1988, and Protocol for the Suppression of Unlawful Acts Against the Safety of Fixed Platforms located on the continental shelf, and the 2005 protocols.
That's not all. The Convention on Limitation of Liabilities for Maritime Claims, the International Convention on Liability and Compensation for Damage in connection with the carriage of hazardous and noxious substances by sea, the International Convention on Civil Liability for Bunker Oil Pollution Damage of 2001, and the Nairobi International Convention on the Removal of Wrecks 2007 are some conventions and protocols that NIMASA is implementing in Nigeria.
The international conventions of the IMO to regulate the maritime industry also include the International Convention for Safe Containers, CSC, 1972. The International Convention on the International Maritime Satellite Organization, IMSO-C, 1976. The Torremolinos International Convention for the Safety of Fishing Vessels, SFV, 1977. The Cape Town Agreement of 2012 on the implementation of the provisions of the 1993 Protocol relating to the Torremolinos International Convention for the Safety of Fishing Vessels and the International Convention on Standards of Training, Certification and Watchkeeping for Fishing Vessel Personnel, STCWF, 1995. Other conventions relating to the prevention of marine pollution include the International Convention relating to intervention on the high seas in cases of oil pollution casualties, the Convention on the Prevention of Marine Pollution by Dumping of Wastes and Other Matter, International Convention on Oil Pollution Preparedness Response and Cooperation, OPRC, of 1990, International Convention for the Control and Management of Ships' Ballast Water and Sediments, 2004, and the Hong Kong International Convention for the Safe and Environmentally Sound Recycling of Ships, 2009. The last but not the least are the International Convention on Civil Liability for Oil Pollution Damage, CLC, the Protocol to the International Convention on the Establishment of an International Fund for Compensation for Oil Pollution Damage Fund, 1992, the Convention relating to civil liability in the field of maritime carriage of nuclear material, Nuclear, 1971, and the Athens Convention relating to the carriage of passengers and their luggage by sea, PAL, of 1974.
We're still talking about maritime security and the fact that it affects us in more ways than we can even imagine. Even in your home right now, it affects you somehow. And I have a professor with me right now, Professor Tim Edmonds. He is from the University of Bristol, co-director, safeseas.net. Welcome to NIMASA This.
Thank you.
You talked about the different ways that maritime insecurity could affect not just nations, but even individuals.
Yeah. So maritime insecurities can have all kinds of different impacts. They can impact on state security. If you're not able to trade at sea because ships will be attacked by pirates or whatever, then that's a really major national security issue. By extension, it has economic security into implications. It impacts on the economies of coastal areas. It impacts on key areas of the national economy. But it also offers opportunities in those areas as well. So, for example, sustainable use of fisheries means that people have livelihoods in coastal regions and so on. But maritime insecurities can also have impacts on an environmental level. Overfishing affects biodiversity. That in turn impacts the communities and the people who live by the sea and who live from the sea. It can impact food security. It can mean it's more difficult for fishermen to make profits from their catches and so on. So it affects people at a national security level, at an environmental level, at an economic level, and at a human level. It affects the communities that live by the sea and the people who are affected by it.
Now, talking about safer seas, there is a school of thought that believes that happens on land has its echoes at the sea.
Yes.
That it's basically poverty that's pushing a lot of these people to do some of the things they do. Have you found that to be true?
Well, I don't think poverty necessarily means people become criminals, but I do think that if you're in a situation in which you have always fished your waters, you've always been able to make a profit from your fish, the fishing industry sustains the livelihoods of your local area, and suddenly, because of overfishing, often by industrial trawlers, you're not able to do that anymore. People have to live, and so people sometimes look for other alternative livelihoods in relation to in order to sustain themselves, and that might be illegal fishing themselves, or it might be engaging in other forms of illicit activities which are very profitable, but that actually contribute to maritime insecurities.
Now, you know, the Horn of Africa used to have a challenge, but now it seems like the Gulf of Guinea is almost overtaking that. Can we marry the kind of economic situations of the countries in that region with what is happening?
I think there are some key differences. So if we take the issue of piracy and sea robbery.
What is the difference?
So piracy takes place on the high seas between two ships. Sea robbery takes place in the territorial waters of states. So essentially there are important, it's a geographical distinction. The same action can be sea robbery if it happens in one place or piracy if it happens in another, but it has legal implications. So if something happens in the territorial waters of a state, then it is in that state's own sovereign jurisdiction, and it is up to them to prosecute. If it happens on the high seas, it's more complicated. So that's one of the differences. Now, that's important because off the coast of Somalia, most of the piracy activities that went on did take place on the high seas. So they challenged international trade routes, and they took place a long way from land often. Here in the Gulf of Guinea, a lot of the attacks take place much, much closer to shore, so they take place in regional waters. That's one important distinction. The other important distinction is the model, the business model that the pirates use. In the Western Indian Ocean, it was focused almost wholly on kidnap and ransom. Here, it's much more complicated. There's kidnap and ransom, but there's also the theft of cargoes, including oil, bunkering, siphoning oil off ships, robbery of crews, and from the ships themselves. Now that's important because it requires a different kind of supporting infrastructure. In Somalia, it was very localized. You required somewhere to keep your ship and your captives, and that required very localized accommodations with local political authorities. Here, it's much more sophisticated. It needs to be for piracy to work, it needs to be integrated into local markets. You need somewhere to sell your materials. You need port facilities and infrastructure to process things. You need mechanisms for laundering your profits and so on. So it's a much more sophisticated, much more organized business model than perhaps was the case in Somalia. I would like to see attention given to not just on what happens at sea, which is important, enforcement at sea is important, but I think if we're looking to the longer term, it involves how we think about tackling some of these issues on land. And my key takeaway would be to think about piracy not primarily as or just as a security threat at sea, but also as a form of organized crime. And that allows you to think about how do we understand the organizational structures behind it, how do we target the kingpins as well as the foot soldiers at sea.
Introducing the new face of the Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency, NIMASA. We are charting the direction for a maritime and regulating the industry for a better, bigger, and more economically stable Nigeria. Evolved to serve you better. We are NIMASA. New face, rejuvenated service. NIMASA, changing the tides in your favor.
There is a belief out there that the maritime industry is male-dominated. Well, that is true. But even though it is male-dominated, there are women who are making a huge mark in that industry too. We'll be presenting to you some of those women as the Association of Women in Maritime Africa paid a courtesy visit to the NIMASA headquarters.
The Women in Maritime Africa, WIMA, led by their president Hajia Bola Muse, paid a courtesy visit to NIMASA and were received by the agency's executive director, admin and finance, Barrister Chidi Ofodile. Hajia Muse spoke briefly about WIMA and how they have empowered women in some communities in Nigeria.
We employ women in Makoko fishing community in Lagos by donating giant oven for fish processing and preservation. We participated in international maritime activities, including providing community service during the World Ocean twice. In addition to this, another initiative, we hosted the conference and annual general meeting for the whole of Women Africa, where participants from other African countries flew in to attend the event. Between 2019 and now, we have embarked on a number of capacity development programs, including organizing training for our members locally and attendance of various international conferences where we have been recognized. Some of our immediate plans are continual development of women maritime in Nigeria, using technology to bridge knowledge gap, continuous advocacy for gender equality.
On his part, Honorable Chudi Ofodile applauded them for their efforts in creating awareness for more participation of women in the sector. He said that the management of NIMASA under the leadership of Dr. Bashir Jamo is committed to constant stakeholders' engagement in the discharge of her mandate.
Look at the head of administration, the director of administration, a woman like you, the director of cabotage services. There are a lot of them, but they are not here today. So I think we have done well also in this particular objective of So it's also that the director of administration is here because is also she supervises unit. So that is one area I think that collaborate with you in assisting your training requirements. We also encourage stakeholder training in maritime administration. It's important to carry along the stakeholders. If they don't understand our mandate, then it's going to be difficult for us to achieve our own objectives.
Following the recent spate of boat mishaps within Nigerian inland waters with the attendant loss of lives, the Director General of NIMASA, Dr. Bashir Jamo, has intensified the campaign for proper adherence to safety procedures in the maritime sector. In condolence tweets on his official handle, Dr. Jamo said, "I'm sad to hear of the Lagos boat mishap that claimed innocent lives. My condolences to families who lost loved ones to this watery tragedy. Safety must remain our watchword on our waters. Protocols must be adhered to by ferry operators. Saddened yet again over the Benue boat mishap. This is one watery tragedy to many. Began reaching out to stakeholders and players towards action to improve safety on our waters. Safety is everybody's business. My sympathies to government and people of Benue on this sad news.
Do you know who a seafarer is? Seafarers are the people who make the world go round. Seafarers are people who have been employed to work on ships. They ensure smooth sailing of the ship while making sure that goods and services get to us from every part of the world. And despite the COVID-19 pandemic, this set of people are still working for the benefit of everyone. Wow! Let us celebrate these special people as they are the people who truly make the world go round. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Maritime Administration and Safety Agency, NIMASA.
Thank you for allowing us to share your time with you on NIMASA this week. Now, the maritime sector concerns all of us. The safety also concerns all of us. If you see something, do say something. You could know more about the maritime sector on NIMASA by visiting NIMASA's website, and you could also follow NIMASA on all her social media platforms: YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. They are all at NIMASA Official. At NIMASA Official. My name is Cordelia Ogbe. I'll always say this: stay safe. Bye-bye.